Hello and welcome to this new edition of Beyond the Words. My name is Bruno Combar. Today my guest is an actor. She's a producer, a speaker, an author. And oh, by the way, she also finds the time to be an Associate Manager of Localization at Mattel. Joining us from LA, Jenna Edwards. Hello and welcome to the show.
Oh my gosh, hello. I'm tired just hearing all of that, but it's fine. I got 2 hours in the morning before I have to start work. I like to make use of my time.
How are you, Jenna?
I'm great. I'm so excited about doing this podcast. I love what you are trying to accomplish with Beyond the Words. I think it's going to be really cool.
Thank you very much. And I know it's very early for you in LA, so thank you for getting up early for us this morning. My first question, Jenna, is when I did a bit of research about your profile, I found that, and I heard on another podcast, that you were on the last ever scene. The last scene that was ever shot on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Yeah. Is that true?
Yes. It is. It was an experience. Everybody, like they said, the show went on forever. It was such a huge hit. And when you do projects like that, you're like in the same space with the same people, like in a very intense manner for a long period of time. So they said, okay, cut, that's a wrap. And like people were crying and hugging. And I was on the show for one day. So I'm just standing there like super awkward. What do I do now? So yeah, no, but it was one of my favorite shows growing up. So I was extremely honored to get to be any little tiny part in the show.
That's wonderful. And also that scene can be seen on IMDb. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Oh,
no,
yes.
I did not know that.
Yes.
Oh,
you have. Exciting. I'm sure you have your own IMDb page, and and I was seeing it's there for posterity. So we'll put a link in the show notes for our viewers and listeners.
Oh my gosh, and me, I'm gonna definitely go and grab it. That's so fun. Yeah, it's a really powerful scene, I have to say. Like my part is only 7 seconds, but I have to say, and I talk about this quite a bit, they say in acting, there's no small roles, only small actors. And that's just kind of a motivational thing for actors because it's such a tough business, right? And so when they called me in, I had no lines and it was 7 seconds of screen time. But I can't tell you how many times I've been approached when people recognize me, because Buffy fans are really awesome. Like they are in it, right? And so when they realized the role I played, like it was a pivotal role because it was during this scene where she's like, everybody who would be a slayer can be a slayer. Like she's giving the power to all of these women all over the world. And my particular scene was that I just rose into the camera and I blocked a punch because I was being abused. And I had this woman come up to me once and she recognized who I was. And she's like, that scene made me leave my abusive boyfriend.
Wow.
And I was just like, holy man. How do you even process something like that? Right. Yeah. And so I say that to everybody listening, like, you just never know what the work you're putting out in the world will do to something or for someone. So keep it up.
Absolutely, yeah. Now, having said that, I don't think that the scene on IMDb is from Buffy because it's a longer scene and it's not what you described. So, but anyway, it's another of your performances as an actor. So this is great. So, as I said in my introduction, you've had many lives as an actor, producer, a radio host as well. You've done podcasts. And you're still actively, but are you a podcast host as well these days, or
previously? Not these days. I've narrowed it down this year to author.
Yes,
again,
of course.
I only have a couple of hours before my full-time job at Mattel, so I have to pick like one thing to focus on in those, precious few minutes that I get to be creative on my own projects.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the author side a bit later. But What led you to the localization industry eventually?
Yeah. It is interesting because when you and I were talking, you were talking about like linear careers, and I have not, absolutely not had a linear path to anything I've ever done. If I'm being completely honest, I'm kind of that person who just is like, oh, that looks cool. Oh, yeah, let me see what's going on. And because of that, I ended up with a really prolific background in producing. And I used to teach producing at New York Film Academy. And one of the things I would tell people was producing is producing is producing. So
Mhm.
basically, film producing is a very similar job to television producing, which is very similar to podcasting and YouTube series and all of that. And so the path to Mattel for me was getting that experience in basically project management, but specifically with media. So producing, and the position opened up in the digital department at Mattel. It's now called Integrative Marketing Communications Department. When I first started, it was the digital engagement group, and it was specifically on the team that does the YouTube content. So the coolest thing I think about working in the department that I work in is all of Mattel's brands. Well, I'll say like 90% of them have their own YouTube channels. And each of those channels, there's original content being created. So Barbie, for example, has a bunch of animated short form content that we put up on YouTube. And I got brought in to um, interview for a different position within that department. And then this position in localization opened up and it was a better fit. So I got to come in and basically produce the localization of the YouTube content. So I basically make all the English videos that are produced here look like they were made in other countries, which is really fun.
Mm. My next question was going to be what sort of skills you brought to the to the job of localization. Now, I think you sort of answered already a bit. You know, the
Mhm.
skills in project management. I suppose juggling with different balls and not dropping any. What else would you say you brought to the job from coming from an external perspective?
I would say collaboration. Mattel is
Hmm.
very big on collaboration. Film in general is a very collaborative art form. So, collaboration, like learning how to be effectively collaborative, is a very important skill. Organizing,
Hmm.
absolutely. Communicating, those are all things that I do every single day. And those are all skills I think that are applicable to any job, and but especially important when you are working on such big group projects. There's hundreds of people that you're working with to achieve this single goal. And so it can get a little messy if you're not you know really focused on collaborating and communicating and organizing.
Hmm. And I think you probably brought a sort of cultural awareness as well because you studied Japanese at university. So learning Japanese is not just learning language; it's learning a culture as well, isn't it? Um,
Absolutely.
and so maybe you brought that to the job as well, that cultural awareness.
Yeah, it's so funny. I just love humans. And I love human behavior. And I think that's why I got into acting. Like, acting is basically the study of human behavior. And I really love to understand how different cultures work with like human behavior. And I'm from Minnesota, but I live in Los Angeles. And I think of that as a different culture completely. Right. I'm like, oh, when I was in Minnesota, I would look at it this way. But now that I'm in California, I look at it this way. When I'm in Japan, I look at it this way. I also spent 6 months of my high school senior year in Thailand. So that was a completely different culture. And so I just really love to find the connection between all of the cultures, because and that's what I love about localization, right? It's like localizing means getting, how do I say it? Taking a piece of content with a message like diversity, for example, and figuring out how to translate that into a piece of content that also means diversity, but with the language and the music and the like different vocalists that would be the best person to give that message to the audience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, especially in what is more or less the entertainment industry. I mean, it's a broader entertainment industry. I mean, you know, so much of it is not just language, but it's also music. It's very much visual as well. I read that, like, if you take a product like Barbie, it's like the product localization as well, because if you take the example of China, Barbie started as a sort of westernized character, and then very early on, she was localized with more Chinese features and a Chinese, more traditional dress. So yeah, I mean, there's so many different layers to localization when you're in that industry. Now, this is what you brought to the industry, whether you know your skills from different coming from the producing world, and what do you think localization brought to you as a person?
I love that. I feel like it brought to me the ability to kind of geek out about the fact that I love other cultures.
Mhm.
And so, like, there was a part of me for a long, long time that felt too big for the world. Like, I get really excited about stuff. And I've always been just really excited about other cultures and other people and how they work. And growing up in a town with 2006 people in Minnesota, like, I didn't get to have conversations like this, you know, where we're talking about culture and we're talking about like your path on your career path, like all of this stuff. And so working at Mattel in localization has really allowed me to be big about my love of other cultures, and I get to, you know, for my job actually dive in to, you know, oh, how would we say this line, like it, or not even this line, like how would we communicate this idea in, you know, Latin America or in Europe or in Asia. Like it's really brought a confidence
Yeah.
and a joy back into my life that wasn't there before. And I mean, I get to work for Mattel, right? Like Barbie's my boss. So this
And
is
she
my
seems to be
first,
quite bossy as well, from what I can see from the movie.
she is busy. This is, I'm like, Barbie's my boss and that woman is busy. We, and it's so inspiring, right? Like I remember being a little 4-year-old girl in Minnesota playing with my Barbies, being like, oh, I want to live by the beach. Oh, I want to, you know, be able to swim every day because it's nice. And now I do. I literally live my Barbie dream. And I have to pinch myself on a daily basis. But it's such a cool environment to work in because this is my first corporate job. Like my career path has been so non-traditional.
Mhm.
And so getting to work at Mattel as my first corporate job, I think is a very huge blessing because they encourage creativity. They encourage you to be who you are, you know? And so for someone who's always felt too big for, you know, whatever area I'm in personality wise, like I get to wear yellow every day. I get to like
Mhm.
take pictures in Barbie boxes. I get to like, every morning I walk in and on the second floor we have a giant life-size magic 8 ball
Okay.
in the like employee lobby, and I go up to it and I ask it a question every single day, and my like 13-year-old self freaks out because that was my favorite toy like one of my favorite toys when I was a tween. Anyway, it's just great.
It's wonderful. Wonderful story. Dream come true kind of story.
Yeah.
Um, And you touched upon that, like how it's opened your culturally, how being in touch with different cultures has opened up completely new horizons for you. And I think that Mattel sells in 150 countries. How many languages do you cover roughly?
Well, I'm specifically in the YouTube
Mhm.
space, right? So Mattel localizes different content and product in all of those spaces,
Yeah.
right? But for me, I think it depends on the brand. So I work on Barbie, Polly Pocket, Monster High, Matchbox, Hot Wheels, like all of them. And they each have different languages. Like there are core languages, but there are different
Mhm.
languages. And I want to say the YouTube channels that we have are each brand is anywhere between 10 and 13,
Okay.
I want to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. Still good, a good number to juggle for you.
Yeah. Yes. It's never boring.
Well, now I would like to talk a bit more like on your author, the author side of you, and you've now published your own book called Aggressive
Yes.
Optimism,
Yes.
based on the true story and your story of overcoming PTSD. Um,
Correct.
uh, would you like to tell us a little more about that and what drove
Yes.
you to to write it? Okay, let's move on then.
Yes, yes, I would, Bruno. Thank you very much. No, it's so interesting, right? It's like this book has been in my soul truly for 15 plus years now. Um, Over 20 years ago, there was a really big, horrific crash in the Santa Monica farmers market here in California. So this elderly man drove down 4 blocks of people. And so trigger warning, I probably should have said trigger warning. Um
Mhm.
and he hit over 60 of us and 10 people didn't make it. And so I saw 3 people pass that day. And I always say, like, my brain broke. I didn't have a head injury, but I didn't know how to process what I had seen. And so I developed severe post traumatic stress disorder that made it so I couldn't read. I stuttered when I talked. I would forget basic words. And I just felt like my life was over. And I was told that I was going to have to deal with these symptoms for the rest of my life. And I just, after a certain amount of time, I didn't accept that. And I was trying to figure out how to get better, but it was a relatively new diagnosis for people outside the military at the time. And so I felt really lost and isolated. And I didn't sleep for 8 months and I ended up in the psych ward. And I finally started to get the help that I actually needed. But even that was like such an experience. And so for years now, I've wanted to like write about it. If you go through my history, I've talked about it a million times on different podcasts and radio shows and written about it in blogs and all of that. But I wanted to get the story out in a way that would impact teens,
Mhm.
specifically in young people, because I felt so alone in my emotion. Um, and so I decided to turn that story into a novel. And it's set in high school. And the main character, basically, my goal with it was to create a character. Her name is Nif, and she is an overachiever. And then this thing happens to her that like stops her in her tracks. And and so she's very relatable, right? But so once the stuff starts happening, I really tried to explain what it felt like, what the thought process was, so that the people who might be going through something like this have like a character they can latch onto that is hopeful, and also know that they're not alone. And then equally as important, I wanted it to be for friends and family who didn't quite understand what their loved one was going through. So if you read the book, you'll have an insight, like literally there's so much thought in it where I'm like, the character is talking to themselves in their head. So if you've ever wanted to know what it was like to have some sort of mental injury or illness, this is the book you want to read. And I say that with the utmost confidence because it's very emotional, but it's also a little light. Like,
Mhm.
I don't take myself too seriously.
Mhm.
And I'm like, if you have to, if, if I don't laugh, I'm gonna cry oftentimes. And so, I choose laughter. And I'm really proud of it. I actually have it right here. That's why I keep looking over here, but this is the book.
Perfect. I was going to suggest that, and I think you can find it on all the online usual stores like Amazon or Barnes and Nobles in the US.
Yep.
And is there
It
is
is
there
available internationally.
uh,
It's not localized yet, though. I
that's
banged my
another
head in the
project for you.
game. It just came out, what now, 4 weeks ago? Yeah, so a month ago. I'll give me a little time. I'll get on it. I have to do the audio version first because I've had that asked of me more.
I
But
was going to ask you that because I thought before our podcast, I thought, great, I'm going to listen to the book because I I
I'm
I
so
go for a run every morning, and then these days I just listen to books because otherwise, if I try and read in the evening, I just fall asleep, even if the book is very riveting. And so I listen to books now mostly, and yeah, I thought
yeah.
an audio version would be great. So yeah, count me in.
Apparently, there's some app where you can get Snoop Dogg to read it to you. I'm not sure he's the right vibe, y'all, though.
Okay, I'll
But
get
I
Snoop
kind of
to.
want to listen to it. I would kind of want to be like, Snoop Dogg, read me my book because I would just think it's so
Yeah.
funny.
It certainly is an interesting mix. And I like the term aggressive optimism. And I saw on your website that it's even a registered trademark, isn't it?
Yeah,
Um,
I did. I trademarked it because I loved it so much.
and I heard on a different podcast as well, where you spoke a lot about your trauma and the PTSD. And there's a lot of things that I think are in the book, like when you were the therapist and you had really a moment where you were crying and a very cathartic moment, and then and you realized that your therapist was asleep.
Was
And I,
asleep.
so these are
Yeah.
little stories from in the book that are actually from your own story. And also what I
Yes.
remember from that podcast as well is you said it's quite different. Well, it's actually the opposite. So aggressive optimism is different from toxic positivity, I think.
Correct. Yes.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for allowing me to talk about that because I think it's so important. So, toxic positivity is the opposite. Aggressive optimism is the ability to look at your situation and be really honest with yourself and be like, I don't like this. This is not where I want to be. And then begin to take steps to change whatever you don't like and being really like positive and optimistic about your ability to make those changes. Where I interpret toxic positivity as denial, it's almost like, oh, it's fine. Oh, it's fine. And I am serious when I say that type of denial almost killed me
Hmm.
because I thought that when I wasn't sleeping for 8 months, do you know what it does to you to not sleep for 8 months? I literally went crazy. Like I lost my mind. I had no ability to see the world and the situations I was in any form of logic. And I honestly think that that was because I was so determined to just be okay. But I wasn't able to acknowledge that I wasn't okay. and I needed help and I needed time and all of these things. And so toxic positivity to me is just, I mean, you have to have positivity, right? Like there's a big difference between being positive and then toxic
Yeah.
positivity. I think aggressive optimism is that healthy positivity, where toxic positivity is just like complete denial. Everything's gonna be fine. If you're constantly saying to yourself everything's gonna be fine, but you can't identify what everything, air quote, everything is, and what the steps you're gonna take to get away from the parts that you don't want to, live with anymore, then you're probably in toxic positivity, and that is not
Mhm.
gonna be helpful in any way.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I totally understand, and yeah, you're right. It's basically denial, sweeping things under the carpet, and expecting
Yeah.
things to get better just by themselves.
Yeah, you can't, especially when it's a mental illness, or like I call mine a mental injury.
Mhm.
Um, when it's something medical, denying it is the most dangerous thing you can do. Like you wouldn't deny if you got diagnosed with cancer,
Yeah.
and you wouldn't ignore if you broke your leg.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it's the same thing when you're going through something like depression or PTSD or any number of mental illness or injury. You can't deny it. Like, even if it's just a funk,
Hmm.
you need to acknowledge that you're not feeling well in order to identify whether or not it is a funk or if you really need
Hmm.
help. So that's my take on it. I'm not a
Yeah.
professional. It's just I'm very experienced in the world of
and
mental
and
injury.
and also, I think we've come leaps and bounds, and with mental health in the 20 years since it happened to you as well. I think that if it happened
Yes.
today, it would be less stigmatized. You would probably be diagnosed with PTSD a lot earlier in the process, and all these things.
Well, I was diagnosed right away.
Oh, were
Oh, I
you?
was a
Okay.
mess. Oh, I was a mess. I was diagnosed 2 days
Okay.
after the crash,
Okay.
but I was told I was gonna be that way forever.
Wow.
And that was like, I think that's the thing that can change is the different options in therapy and the different types of doctors, like your ability to find help and the right help is much more robust than it was when I was first diagnosed. And that actually is a great segue, if you don't mind me just talking to your audience about mental health. One of the biggest lessons that I learned, and I talk about it in the book, is finding the right help for you. Like what works for me might not work for
Mhm.
but and that's where the optimism comes in. And that's the aggressive optimism piece, is like you have to be committed to figuring out what works for you
Mhm.
and doing that deep dive of like introspection and personal, like, I'm totally blanking on the term, even though I use it all the time. See, words, too early in the morning. Um, but like personal reflection, that's the word I was looking for. Like diving in and reflecting on who you are, how you operate without judgment. I think
Mhm.
that's the key, right? We judge ourselves so much. The main character in the book is based on me, but so is the villain in the book. Like I it's so funny. People are like, who's Jessa? So her name is Jessa. Who's Jessa? And I'm like, Jessa's just a like made up character based on maybe like 5 people I grew up with. But I would say 70% of her attitude and dialogue is my internal judgment, right? Where I was just so, so mean to myself during
Mhm.
this entire process. And I think that's a really important thing to point out, is like, what are we saying to ourselves? As we're going through this stuff, I was so mean to myself. I
Mhm.
wouldn't have been mean to myself if I broke my leg,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think it's important that we recognize how we roll when we're healthy, You know, like I love a checklist.
Yeah.
So how can I apply loving a checklist to figuring out, you know, my mental health? Those types of things, like making those correlations and then finding a therapist or support people, professionals. Please
Hmm.
hear me when I say professionals, because we can't be talking to our 16-year-old best friend about something that is too big for them. They
Yeah.
don't, they probably don't know what you're talking about, and they're going to say something that's going to trigger you. I promise.
Yeah.
So, professionals, finding the right professionals, not the ones that fall asleep. True story, y'all. You have to read about it in the book. I think I wrote about it
There you go.
in a way
And
that's
then,
very
and
entertaining.
you're right. You're right about that internal voice as well. I think it's Nietzsche who said that there'll always be someone to screw up your life, and that's you. You know, mess up with your life. And he probably didn't express it in that way, and he said it in German anyway. But you get you get the meaning of it.
And it hasn't been localized effectively.
It hasn't
That's,
been,
that's
not by
totally
me
fine.
anyway. um, um, I, it's really, thank you very much for sharing these experiences. And yeah, I'll put there's a podcast as well that you can see on YouTube where you talk about it at length as well. And I'll put that in the show notes as well for people who are
Oh,
interested
great.
in finding out more, and also the link to your website as well, where they can find out more about the book. Now going back to to languages, and it feels like, whoa, you know, we a big jump, no transition. Um,
Well, I actually have a really good way to transition if you want me to.
Tell me, go ahead.
So, I feel like one of the things I've learned in my life and being in localization, especially, is it's not just about language,
Hmm.
right? And so it's about what I just said, which is figuring out the best way to communicate or to achieve the goal set out. For us, it's the best way to communicate. For, you know, an accountant, it's the best way to do your taxes for this person's particular situation. So I almost feel like aggressive optimism is a story of localizing your mental health. Like, how do you take all of these resources, all of these air quote languages, and pick and choose the best words, AKA the best therapies, to get you better? And it's the same with your career. How do you pick and choose your strengths, the ones that you love? Like, I have strengths that I really resent having because people will call me out on them, and that's the jobs they want to give me. And I'm like, but that's boring, right? So, what strengths do you want to highlight in your career? And how can you localize those strengths to that job application or that role in the company or that interview? So I feel like localization, yes, it's a technical term for translating, but I feel like it's applicable. The idea of it is applicable to every aspect of our life.
Yeah, that sounds really great, especially when in our job we say we translate ideas, not words, and it's definitely taking those ideas and putting words on them.
Yes.
And then I like the analogy, so thank you very much for this transition. I'll reuse it. I hope it's not copyrighted.
No, go for it. I love it. Let's empower people to find the career path that makes them the happiest.
Fantastic. So let's go to our last question. And it's a question we ask all our guests. So as we mentioned earlier, you learned Japanese and you studied Japanese at university. Do you speak any other languages?
Um, no. I mean, I know a few words here and there, but no, I would say Japanese is definitely
Okay,
the most.
so there you go. So if you were to start learning a new language, which language would that be and why?
Italian. I want to learn Italian because pasta. But also, honestly, because I have been a vegetarian since I was 13 and I just this year became a vegan. And it's very difficult to travel as with food restrictions like that because people who don't um believe the way that I do will just be like, oh, it's just a little chicken broth. You're like, what? So I literally have to ask like 8 questions before I order my rice or
Yeah.
mashed potatoes or vegetables, because so many people will put like chicken broth and things to make it more flavorful. And so I want to be able to go to Italy and eat all the food, but also know for sure that it doesn't have any animal products in it. So
Yeah.
I really want to learn
Yeah.
Italian so I can like
And you could
eat my way across the country.
you could try all the varieties of pesto with vegan parmesan, obviously.
Exactly. See, you get it. Yeah. Nutritional yeast all the way.
So there you go. We've got you down for Italian. I think it's the first guest who went for Italian. So there you go. Thank you very much, Jenna. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for opening up as well. I hope it's inspired a lot of people, and also for your career progression and your career path as well. I hope it's going to inspire people that to work in the localization industry, even if they started in a completely different domain. And so yeah, thank you very much for taking the time, and I hope we can speak again soon.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having me. This is great. And yes, please go follow your passion. That's all I have to say about it.
Thank you.